December 1944, a battalion headquarters near Saarbrücken, Germany. Snow falls heavily on a stone farmhouse. Inside, the air smells of wet wool and stale tobacco. A cold wind rattles the wooden window frames. A senior American officer stands by a map table, ignoring the black telephones sitting directly to his right. He points a finger at a map instead. Outside, a young soldier kicks the starter of a frozen motorcycle, the engine sputtering to life in the freezing slush. The officer has just forbidden his men from using the lines or the airwaves to save a trapped unit. He trusts paper over speed. It will take 90 minutes for that paper to travel down a single shelled road. By then, the artillery will already be falling on men who had no warning. General George S. Patton will soon discover exactly how much that 90-minute delay cost, and his response will dismantle an old officer's rigid assumptions forever. This is the story of what Patton did when a commander sent a withdrawal order by motorcycle, and it arrived too late. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War. 2 stories that show when a man's rank exceeded his judgment. Second Lieutenant David Park was 25 years old. He came from Denver, Colorado, and served as a motorcycle messenger attached to the battalion headquarters. Before the war, he worked as a mechanic in a small garage, fixing commercial trucks. He enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor because his younger brother had already joined the Navy. Park had seen heavy fighting across France, losing his best friend to a sniper outside Metz. He carried a jagged scar across his left shoulder from a mortar fragment. He knew the true cost of delay on the front lines. Now, he sat on a vibrating machine in the freezing mud, waiting for a piece of paper that would decide the lives of dozens of men. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Sutter was 47 years old. He came from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and commanded the battalion. He was a man of rigid habits who wore a perfectly tailored wool overcoat. Despite the mud of the Saar Basin, his leather boots were polished to a mirror shine by his orderly every morning. Sutter grew up in a wealthy family with a long tradition of military service, and he believed his rank gave him an absolute understanding of warfare. He possessed an almost paranoid distrust of electronic communication. He frequently told his staff that modern technology was a trap designed by the enemy. He firmly believed that every telephone wire was tapped by German spies, and every radio frequency was monitored by intercept stations. To Sutter, a physical piece of paper carried by a loyal soldier was the only secure method of command. He chose to ignore the reality of a changing battlefield to preserve his own sense of absolute security. His obsession with old methods was about to collide with a fast-moving German assault. The Allied advance toward the Rhine had slowed to a crawl during the bitter winter weeks of late 1944. The German border was heavily fortified, and every mile of progress cost the American army heavily in blood and equipment. Supplies were difficult to move through the freezing mud, and cold rain turned fields into deep bogs. In this sector near Saarbrücken, the front lines were fluid and constantly shifting under the pressure of local counterattacks. Small units often found themselves isolated in forward outposts, relying entirely on clear communication with their headquarters to survive. A single misunderstood order or a delayed message could cause an entire defensive line to collapse in a matter of minutes. In most sectors, senior commanders utilized every tool available to maintain contact with their troops. They strung miles of heavy black telephone wire through the forests and used powerful radio sets to broadcast urgent warnings. Other battalions routinely accepted the risk of enemy interception because they knew that speed was the most critical factor in modern combat. They recognized that a warning sent quickly could save lives, even if the enemy managed to catch a few words over the airwaves. Higher headquarters had occasionally overlooked minor technical infractions by officers who preferred older, familiar methods during the early stages of the campaign. But by December, the intensity of the German resistance made such allowances impossible. The enemy was looking for any weakness in the American deployment, using sudden artillery barrages to isolate forward companies before overrunning them. The command post in the stone farmhouse remained dry and quiet, insulated from the chaos just a few miles away. Inside that room, The black telephone sat silent on the wooden table, its wires leading out into the snow. The tactical situation on the map was changing by the minute, but the orders from the headquarters were static. A young operations captain stood by the map table inside the battalion headquarters. He picked up the black telephone receiver and held it out toward the commander. He said, "Sir, the forward companies are reporting heavy engine noises across the river." Lieutenant Colonel Sutter did not look up from his desk. He said, "Put the receiver down, Captain." The captain hesitated, but kept the phone in his hand. He said, "They need the withdrawal order immediately, sir, or they will be cut off when the attack lands." Sutter slammed his fountain pen onto the wooden table. He said, "I told you to put that instrument down." The captain placed the receiver back on its cradle. He said, "The lines are clear, Colonel, and we can code the transmission in less than 3 minutes." Sutter stood up and pulled his tailored wool overcoat tightly around his chest. He said, "I don't trust wires the Germans can tap." The captain said, "Sir, the forward positions are completely exposed without this order." Sutter said, "I don't trust radios the Germans can intercept." The captain looked at the map where 31 men were waiting for instructions. He said, "A telephone call takes 30 seconds, sir, and the enemy cannot react to an encoded message that quickly." Sutter walked to the window and pointed out into the freezing mud. He said, "A man on a motorcycle is the only secure communication." The captain looked out at the snow falling on the empty road. He said, "Lieutenant Park will have to drive through sporadic artillery fire to reach them, Colonel." Sutter turned his back to the window. He said, "Then he will drive fast." The captain opened his leather dispatch book and held out a fountain pen. He said, "If the road at the intersection is blocked by shelling, the delay will be catastrophic." Cutter snatched the paper from the table and folded it twice. He said, "My decisions are based on absolute security, Captain, not on your panic." The captain took the folded paper and walked out into the cold hallway. He knew the road to the forward company was 4 miles long and completely unshielded from German spotters. He walked past the silent radio operator and went down the stone steps to the courtyard. He handed the message to Lieutenant Park and told him to ride like hell. The captain then walked back upstairs to the operations room and looked at the clock on the wall. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. He sat down at his desk and began typing a formal memorandum regarding the commander's refusal to use the electronic lines. The captain realized the situation had bypassed his authority, and he sent a duplicate copy of the log directly to the regiment. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the gate. 4 stars on his helmet, ivory revolvers on his belt. The vehicle came to a sudden halt in the freezing slush, throwing a spray of dirty ice against the stone foundation of the farmhouse. The general walked in unannounced. Every officer in the room froze, their eyes instantly fixing on the wet wool of his uniform and the gleam of his insignia. The low murmur of the staff vanished entirely. Patton walked straight to the map table, his boots clicking sharply against the cold floorboards. He did not look at the chairs. He did not remove his gloves. He stood over the tactical display, his eyes scanning the red markings that indicated the morning's disaster. He did not raise his voice. Patton studied him. Sutter stood at rigid attention, his polished boots tight together, his tailored overcoat immaculate. Patton said, "Did you refuse to use the telephone lines at 8 o'clock this morning?" "Colonel," Sutter said. "Yes, General, because wire security is paramount in this sector." Patton said, "Did you send a tactical withdrawal order by motorcycle instead?" Sutter said, "I did, sir, because a physical messenger is the only method the enemy cannot intercept over the airwaves." Patton said, "What time did the German artillery strike the forward positions?" Sutter said, "The bombardment began at 0840, General." Patton said, "And what time did your motorcycle messenger actually deliver the paper to the company commander?" Sutter shifted his weight slightly. He said, "The order arrived at 09 Mach, 50 minutes after the assault began." Patton looked down at the map where the 31 casualties had occurred. He said, "Your order took 90 minutes by motorcycle. A telephone call takes 30 seconds. Your men needed that order at 0800. They got it at 09 Mach. The Germans attacked at 0840. "Do you see the problem?" Sutter said. "Wire security." Patton said, "The Germans intercept your wire? Then encode the message. Use a brevity code. That takes 3 minutes, not 90. You chose the slowest communication method in the inventory, and my men paid for it." Sutter stood silent, his jaw tightly clenched, his eyes fixed on the wall behind the general. Patton leaned forward over the table, his voice remaining low and steady. He said, "You sacrificed 31 soldiers to protect a piece of wire. You preferred a perfect silence over an effective defense. Speed of communication wins battles. A perfect message that arrives too late is worse than an imperfect message that arrives on time. You value your own theories more than the lives of the men under your command. You have insulated yourself from the reality of this war inside a dry kitchen, while a lieutenant is sliding through ditches to clean up your delay. That balance ends right now." Patton did not delay the execution of his order. He turned to his master sergeant and commanded him to strip the colonel of his insignia immediately in front of the entire assembled battalion staff. The sergeant stepped forward and used a pocket knife to slice the thread holding the silver oak leaves to Sutter's wool collar. The small metal pieces dropped to the wooden floor with a sharp clink. Patton then ordered Sutter to remove his polished leather boots and his tailored winter overcoat. The disgraced officer stood shivering in his socks and olive drab undershirt on the cold stone floor. 2 military policemen pushed open the heavy wooden door and led Sutter out into the courtyard. The entire command staff watched from the windows as the former commander was forced onto the back seat of an open messenger motorcycle. He sat exposed to the biting wind and driving snow without any protection from the winter weather. The driver kicked the engine to life, and the loud exhaust echoed through the stone courtyard. Patton ordered the driver to take the exact 4-mile route that Lieutenant Park had navigated earlier that morning. Sutter spent the next 90 minutes riding through the freezing slush and sporadic artillery fire, completely disconnected from his modern comforts. The witnesses stood in absolute silence as the vehicle disappeared into the gray fog. David Park returned to Denver, Colorado, after the Army deactivated his unit in late 1945. He opened his own automotive repair shop on the north side of the city, specializing in heavy truck transmissions. He married his childhood sweetheart and raised 3 children, never mentioning the war to his neighbors or customers. He kept his old leather dispatch book in a cedar chest in his bedroom, but never opened it. Park lived a quiet, industrious life until his death in 1988, remembered by his family as a man who valued precision and never tolerated a broken promise. Charles Sutter returned to Louisiana in 1946 after completing a brief term of confinement in a military stockade for gross negligence. His family wealth allowed him to avoid poverty, but his reputation within the community was completely destroyed. He lived in a secluded house outside Baton Rouge, refusing to attend veteran reunions or military parades. He spent his remaining years writing long, unpublished manuscripts defending his theories on pre-modern military logistics and wire security. Sutter died bitter and isolated in 1973, insisting until his final breath that the changing world had left behind the only true values of command. General Patton never included the incident in his public reports or press briefings during the final months of the European campaign. He maintained a brief summary of the relief order in his private papers, which remained locked in his personal desk until his death. In a letter to his wife written 3 days after the confrontation, he noted that a commander who fears modern technology is more dangerous than an enemy division. He wrote that an army cannot move faster than its thoughts, and a stubborn mind is the heaviest burden a soldier can carry into battle. Some historians have argued that Lieutenant Colonel Sutter's concerns regarding signal security were technically justified during the winter of 1944. They point out that German intercept units were highly skilled at monitoring unencrypted civilian telephone lines and tracing radio transmissions to pinpoint American command posts. These observers believe that preserving tactical secrecy was a valid priority for an isolated battalion commander facing a major counteroffensive. Others have argued the opposite, stating that a complete reliance on physical messengers during a fast-moving mechanized assault was an obsolete approach that guaranteed disaster. They maintain that operational speed must always take precedence over total security when lives are on the line. What is certain is that the mandatory implementation of rapid, encoded telephone communications significantly reduced casualties across the sector during the subsequent German retreats. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have relieved the commander immediately, or would you have given him another chance to adapt to modern realities? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about what happened when old hierarchies met new realities, make sure to subscribe.